Some stories don't begin with a scream, they begin quietly, with small compromises, subtle fear, and moments that feel off but are easy to explain away. A tone of voice, a decision made for you, a door that doesn't quite close behind someone who should already be gone. And by the time anyone asks the right questions, it's often too late. Every year in Britain, women disappear not in the dramatic sense, but in plain sight, inside homes, relationships, systems meant to protect them. Their lives don't end suddenly, they are dismantled over time. Control replaces care, love becomes ownership, and the danger doesn't arrive out of nowhere. It grows patiently, waiting for the moment resistance finally appears. Sarah Henshaw was 31 years old, a mother, a daughter, a friend with an infectious laugh and a future she was finally trying to reclaim. For over a decade, the warning signs were there, visible, documented, ignored. When she chose at last to end what had been controlling her life, the consequences were irreversible. This is not just the story of how Sarah died, it's the story of why, and how easily it could happen again. Listen closely, because this story doesn't belong to the past. It was 2012 when Sarah first brought Darren Hall into her world. On the surface, there was nothing immediately alarming enough to justify walking away. Sarah was already a single mother, carrying the cautious hope of someone who wanted stability, not chaos. She wanted something that would last. Darren appeared willing to step into that space, but Lorraine, Sarah's mother, felt uneasy almost immediately. It wasn't one big moment. It was a collection of small ones. Darren spoke over Sarah. He answered questions directed at her. He decided where they would go, who they would see, what plans made sense and which didn't. He asked where she was going, who she would be with, when she would be back. Not once, but constantly. None of it looked violent. None of it looked dramatic. And that is precisely why it was dangerous. This is how coercive control begins, quietly, invisibly. It does not announce itself as abuse. It presents as concern, protectiveness, involvement. Over time, those behaviors harden into rules. The person living inside it becomes conditioned, slowly and deliberately, to adapt, to explain it away, to minimize it, to stop trusting their own instincts. By the time someone on the outside notices, the person living inside it is often already trapped. As the relationship continued, Darren's need for control intensified. Friends later recalled how Sarah seemed less spontaneous, less free. Plans had to be checked, messages were monitored, arguments followed any hint of independence. This wasn't about conflict, it was about dominance. Darren needed to be central, unquestioned, in control of Sarah's movements and choices. By 2016, Sarah was pregnant with Darren's child. Pregnancy is often imagined as a protective factor, a moment when abuse pauses. In reality, it is one of the most dangerous times for women in controlling relationships. The abuser senses increased vulnerability, increased dependency, and a heightened fear of abandonment. That year, Darren pushed Sarah in the stomach. She was taken to hospital. The baby survived. Sarah survived. But something fundamental was revealed in that moment. Violence during pregnancy is not impulsive. It is intentional. It communicates one thing clearly. Your safety does not matter, not even now. And yet, Sarah did not leave immediately. This matters, because too often people ask the wrong question. They ask why she stayed instead of why he abused. Leaving an abusive relationship is not a single decision. It is a process, and it is often the most dangerous phase of all. By that point, Sarah had a child, another on the way, and a partner who had spent years isolating her and undermining her confidence. She was navigating fear, responsibility, financial pressure, and the very real risk that leaving would escalate the violence. What is equally important is what didn't happen during those years. There was no meaningful intervention, no lasting legal consequence, no system that stepped in and said, "This behavior will not be tolerated." When violence produces no consequences, it teaches the abuser a lesson. Not that they are wrong, but that they can get away with it. Around 2018, Sarah finally did what so many survivors describe as the hardest thing they've ever done. She left. She reclaimed her home in Ilkeston. She began rebuilding her life as a single mother to her 2 daughters. On paper, it looked like the end of the relationship. In reality, one small detail meant it wasn't. Darren still had a key to her house. The key was never returned. The locks were never changed. To someone unfamiliar with abuse dynamics, that might seem trivial. It wasn't. That key represented access, permission, a refusal to accept the separation as final. It allowed Darren to continue crossing boundaries physically, not just emotionally. Contact continued after the breakup, partly because they shared a child. Co-parenting with an abusive ex-partner is one of the most complex and dangerous arrangements imaginable. It gives the abuser a socially acceptable reason to remain present. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to reassert control. Years passed. On the outside, life appeared to move forward. On the inside, Darren's influence never fully disappeared. Then, in April 2022, Sarah's grandfather died. Grief changes people. It strips away illusions. In the aftermath of that loss, Sarah made a decision that was different from the ones before. This time she was clear. This time she was final. Darren was no longer welcome in her life, in any capacity. For many people, rejection hurts. For controlling abusers, it threatens identity. When control is the foundation of your sense of self, losing it feels intolerable. Research on intimate partner homicide is unequivocal. The period following a victim's decision to permanently separate is the most dangerous time of all. Sarah didn't know that Darren was already losing his grip. June 20th, 2023 was a Tuesday. Earlier that day, Sarah spent time with a friend. Ordinary moments, familiar streets. Nothing about the day suggested it would be her last. That evening, she was captured on CCTV near her home on Norman Street. It was just after 9 p.m. It would become the final public image of her alive. She returned home. Before 10 p.m., the front door opened. Not because Sarah let someone in, but because Darren used the key he still had. He entered uninvited. A friend who was present later confirmed that Sarah told him to leave. He refused. He sat down. He stayed. They ate dinner. They argued. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the kind of tension that people who have lived through abusive relationships recognize instantly. Sarah kept herself composed. Eventually, she drove her friend home. Then she returned, alone. At 10:02 p.m., Sarah sent a message to her best friend. At 10:09 p.m., she sent another. It was the last time she would ever speak to someone who loved her. At 10:37 p.m., her friend checked in again, sensing something wasn't right. There was no reply. Whatever happened next unfolded in silence, and Darren Hall had time. The silence that followed was not empty. It was active. It was being shaped. A neighbor living close to Sarah's home would later tell investigators about a sound she heard that night. A loud bang coming from the direction of the bedroom, followed by sudden, unnatural quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels restful, the kind that presses in on you, heavy and wrong. She hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Moments like that are easy to second guess. You tell yourself there must be an explanation. She sent Sarah a message. A reply came back. The dog had suffered a seizure. Everything was fine. It was plausible, just believable enough to calm immediate concern. What the neighbor couldn't know was that the message hadn't been sent by Sarah at all. Darren Hall was already managing the situation, already controlling the narrative, already buying time. In the early hours of June 21st, the neighbor woke again. She looked outside and noticed something that would stay with her forever. Darren was standing at the back of his van, the rear doors open. He closed them, climbed in, and drove away into the dark. At the time, it meant nothing concrete. Later, it would mean everything. Because Darren was not panicking. He was not frozen by shock. He was moving with purpose. Our phones record more than we realize. Every connection, every movement, every small action leaves behind a digital shadow. Darren Hall's phone would become the most reliable witness in the case. At 1:50 a.m., his phone connected to Sarah's home Wi-Fi. Shortly after, it connected to his van's GPS system. The data shows him driving north along the M1, exiting at junction 29, then heading toward a lay-by on the A617 near Chesterfield. A quiet, isolated stretch of road, the kind of place you don't visit in the middle of the night without a reason. What happened there is written in numbers. For approximately 9 minutes, Darren's phone torch was activated repeatedly. His health app recorded 266 steps, a striking anomaly. Normally, between midnight and 6 a.m., his activity registered as 0. That night, someone was walking back and forth, lifting, moving, working in the dark. This was not wandering, it was effort. The deception didn't stop there. The text sent from Sarah's phone to her neighbor, the one about the dog, required Darren to unlock her phone, type a message in her voice, and send it with intent. This wasn't impulse, it was calculation. The same controlling intelligence that had governed Sarah's life for years was now focused entirely on protecting himself. In the days that followed, Darren told people Sarah had simply left. He contacted her neighbor and claimed he didn't know where she had gone, that she had left early in the morning. When questioned about her car still being parked outside her home, he had no convincing answer. Later, he suggested some of her belongings were missing, attempting to strengthen the illusion that she'd chosen to disappear. But Sarah was a devoted mother. She would not abandon her daughters. Everyone who knew her understood that immediately. Still, 3 days passed. It wasn't until June 23rd that police were contacted with concerns about her welfare. Officers arrived at Norman Street and forced entry. Inside the flat, they found evidence that told a disturbing story. A bucket, a mop, bleach, signs of urgent, deliberate cleaning. A broken necklace with an elephant charm, Sarah's necklace, lying where it shouldn't have been. In total, 23 items were seized, including phones, clothing, a laptop, and a blue tarpaulin. Her dressing gown and slippers were later found discarded in a nearby skip. Ordinary, intimate objects, the kind that don't travel far unless something has gone terribly wrong. Darren Hall was arrested on suspicion of murder that same day. Investigators followed the trail his phone had left behind. Just after midnight on June 26th, a specialist search team combed the undergrowth near the A617 lay-by. There, they found what remained of Sarah Henshaw. Her body was in an advanced state of decomposition. Nearby were fragments of blue tarpaulin, matching the one recovered from her home. The attempt to erase her had failed. At first, Darren denied everything. He presented himself calmly, confidently, a man who believed he had covered his tracks. But as evidence mounted, his story shifted. He offered a new version of events. Sarah, he claimed, had fallen down the stairs. It was an accident. He panicked. Everything that followed, moving her body, cleaning the scene, sending messages from her phone, disposing of her belongings, was the result of fear. The explanation collapses under scrutiny. Panic doesn't plan routes to remote locations. Panic doesn't bring tarpaulin. Panic doesn't send carefully worded messages to neighbors. Panic doesn't activate a phone torch repeatedly to work in darkness. What Darren described required sequential decisions, sustained focus, and the ability to suppress emotion in favor of strategy. His changing accounts revealed more than he intended. First, denial, the posture of someone confident they won't be caught. Then, the accident narrative, the posture of someone adapting to evidence. Neither version resembled remorse. Both resembled self-preservation. The trial began on December 4, 2023, at Derby Crown Court. It lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution faced a challenge. Sarah's body, discovered after several days, could not yield a definitive cause of death. There were no clear forensic injuries that alone could anchor the charge. But murder cases are rarely about one piece of evidence. The jury heard about bruising to the neck consistent with a dressing gown cord, about the matching tarpaulin, about phone data placing Darren at both the home and the disposal site, about the neighbor who heard the bang and saw him loading his van, about messages sent from Sarah's phone after her death, about the bleach, the broken necklace, the years of abuse that framed every action. Each detail reinforced the next. Together, they formed a picture that could not be ignored. The verdict was guilty. Darren Hall was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 17 years. He will not be eligible for parole until he has served that time. He is currently held at HMP Nottingham. For Sarah's family, the verdict delivered a form of justice. Limited, incomplete, yet undeniable. No sentence could restore what was taken from them, but accountability mattered. The community understood that. More than £9,000 was raised to cover Sarah's funeral costs and to support her 2 daughters, girls who will grow up carrying an absence that was never theirs to bear. Yet this case cannot be understood simply as a single criminal act. It was the end point of a long, clearly traceable pattern. From the earliest days of the relationship, Darren's behavior aligned with what psychologists define as coercive controlling violence. This form of abuse is not driven by anger or momentary loss of control. It is driven by power, by entitlement, by the belief that another human being exists to be managed, monitored, and owned. Sarah's decision to leave, and later to sever the relationship permanently, directly challenged that belief. Research on intimate partner violence is unambiguous. When control is confronted decisively, the risk of lethal escalation increases dramatically. The retained house key was not an accident or oversight. It was symbolic. A physical assertion that Darren did not recognize Sarah's right to autonomy, even after the relationship ended. Seen through this lens, the murder was not a deviation from Darren's behavior. It was its culmination. The abuser and the killer were never separate identities. They were the same person, revealed over time. Understanding that truth is essential, because patterns like this do not end unless they are interrupted. Sarah's story demands something of us: attention, recognition, a willingness to see patterns before they end in tragedy. Because nothing about this was sudden, and nothing about it was inevitable. It happened because the warning signs were there, and the systems meant to respond did not act in time. To fully understand what happened to Sarah Henshaw, you have to step back and look at the architecture beneath the crime. Not just the events, but the psychology and the system that allowed those events to unfold. This was not a spontaneous act. It was the end point of a pattern that had been building for more than a decade. From the earliest signs of control in 2012, to the physical violence during pregnancy, to the retained house key after separation, the trajectory is painfully familiar to researchers and professionals who study domestic abuse. Each stage escalated. Each boundary crossed made the next one easier to violate. What makes cases like this especially dangerous is that coercive control rarely looks like chaos. It looks organized, intentional, rational on the surface. Darren Hall did not lose control of his emotions. He exercised control over Sarah's life. And when that control was threatened permanently, his response was not confusion or desperation. It was elimination. The behavior after Sarah's death is critical to understanding this. The staged messages, the calculated use of her phone, the choice of a remote disposal site, the cleaning of the flat. These are not the actions of someone overwhelmed by guilt or panic. They are the actions of someone whose primary concern, even after killing the mother of his child, was himself. Psychologists refer to this as instrumental behavior, actions taken not out of emotion, but to achieve a goal. In this case, the goal was avoiding accountability. That mindset did not appear suddenly on the night Sarah died. It was present throughout the relationship. The murder was not a break from Darren Hall's character, it was its final expression. This case also exposes a deeply uncomfortable truth about prevention. The warning signs were visible for years. Control, isolation, violence during pregnancy, post-separation access. Each one is a known risk factor. Yet no mechanism effectively intervened. No system forced a reckoning early enough to change the outcome. Coercive control is notoriously difficult to prosecute. It doesn't leave bruises that photograph cleanly. It leaves patterns, and patterns are easy to dismiss until it's too late. Victims are often required to explain behavior they've been conditioned to normalize, to prove harm that has been happening quietly for years. Sarah Henshaw deserved better. Her daughters deserved better. And the point of telling this story is not to shock. It's to recognize. To understand that intimate partner homicide is rarely unpredictable. It follows a logic, a timeline, a series of missed opportunities where intervention could have mattered. Sarah's name should not fade into a statistic. Her story is a warning and a responsibility. If anything in this case felt familiar, in your life or in someone else's, it matters. Awareness is not enough on its own, but it is the first step toward breaking patterns that thrive on silence. Before you go, Let me ask you something. Do you believe cases like this are failures of individuals, or failures of systems, or both? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters. If you found this story important, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more deep, carefully researched true crime stories that go beyond the headlines. Because remembering Sarah isn't just about the past. It's about making sure the warning signs are never ignored again.